So we got our Ford Escape here today. Normally I'd like to do things like this in the garage, but yeah. Anyway, so what we're going to do is the front pads and rotors. They're not overly hard to do on these vehicles, but there's the right way and the wrong way to do things. Anyway, so far I have obviously jacked the vehicle up and put it on safety stands, and that would be our first step. Second step would be to pull your tires off, obviously. Okay, so with your tires off, this is what we're looking at. We have obviously our rotor, and then our caliper, which our pads sit in, obviously. Well, I shouldn't say sit in. The outer pad sits in the anchor, and the inner pad sits inside the caliper and then rides in the anchor. But anyway, first thing you have to do here is take off the retaining clip. You'll see right there in the nose of the caliper. The way I usually do that is with a screwdriver and a pry bar. And make sure there's nothing around you, because it's going to fly. So I'll show you the next step here. I'll just have to reposition the camera. Okay, hopefully you can see here. Our next step here is going to be to remove the plastic caps. And we're going to remove our caliper sliding pins. They're a 7mm. There we go. So we'll go ahead and we'll take those out. So with our pins out, the next thing you're going to want to do is take a big screwdriver, and what I do is I go in here to the inside of the rotor and I pry it back a little bit like that. What's going to happen is you're actually going to push the piston in, and it's going to release the caliper. So next thing we can do is remove our caliper. Right? So you can pop the pad out of here. And then I have these caliper hangers, but you kind of do want to support them somehow. Okay, take our outer pad out. And now what retains the anchor here is these two 18mm headed bolts. So we're going to go ahead and remove those. So with the anchor off, the rotor will just slide off now. Well, assuming it's not rusted onto the flange of the hub. Mine aren't, because I put a little bit of anti-seize around there last time I did the brakes on this. But you might have to hammer them. If you do, what you're going to want to do is come in from behind here and hammer it off using the friction face of the rotor. That way you're not going to damage your hub. So the first thing I do is, prior to putting the rotor on, I just go around the outside edge of the flange there with, well, just a little bit of anti-seize. And then I take my new rotor, and I spray it with a bit of brake cleaner, and I clean it off. because a lot of the time they put a anti-corrosion coating on it for while it's in the package. Okay, so once the rotor is cleaned off and slipped on here, I'll take, this is an old spindle nut from, God only knows what car I was working on. Slide it over, grab one of my lug nuts, and we just put it on here. And what will happen is, that'll hold our rotor in position for us. And we'll just go ahead and we'll clean the face of it. Okay, so one of the things that usually contributes heavily to uneven wear is the pad seizing in the anchor, right? Because it's supposed to be a sliding caliper. So your pad's supposed to be able to slide in and out of here. So what we're going to do is I just take and I use the wire wheel on my bench grinder, because you don't want to take too much material and have a sloppy pad, because then you'll start getting a clunking sound from the brake pad actually banging around inside here. So I'll clean this up with the bench grinder and then we'll go from there. Okay, so with our anchor cleaned up, right, we now have a decent surface for our pads to ride in. Now what I was taught was by, well, another guy I worked with, we used dried graphite, and we go ahead and we'd spray where we just cleaned, so that way we had a bit of a corrosion protectant in there. So I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so after a coat of the dried graphite, that's what it looks like. Now, everybody has a different opinion here. Inside the sliding portion of the anchor, I have always used anti-seize, mind you, very sparingly. However, it is heavily dependent on which part of the continent that you live in. Here in the Rust Belt, this will be covered in rust in about, I don't know, 2-3 months. Now, if you use anti-seize, you buy yourself another 3 months. But it's up to you. I can only show you how I do things, and from there it's your decision. Okay, that put together there. Next thing we get to do is put the pads in the caliper. Well, the inner pad anyway. And I'll put the outer one so it's sitting. There we go. Your outer. And the next thing we do is on the ears of the caliper, I take and I put a bit of just synthetic grease. I do that so the pad doesn't end up seized up onto there. I guess a lot of the reason why people tell you not to do the grease or the anti-seize is because of its potential to attract dirt. That's the problem with grease and things of that nature. That being said, though, if you're like me, I frequently service my brakes anyway, so there's never enough time for it to really build up crap. Anyway, so we're gonna take our sliders, which I've wiped all the old grease off. And all I do is I take and I apply a little bit of fresh grease. And we can reinsert them. And we can go ahead and tighten those up now. Okay, that comes the next part. We have to try and get this on here. So what I usually do is I'll take and I'll snap in one end. Because once you get one end on like that, you're kind of laughing, right? The next thing I do is I take and I slide it down like that. I'll grab the end of a pry bar. And that's in. You can see everything slides free. And now we can put our tire on. Okay, first thing you're going to do is pump the brake pedal. So that's going to go ahead and push the caliper pistons back out where they should be. You do that before you go anywhere. Alright, so the first few stops we're going to make, we're going to do a little bit of a medium stop here. Okay. Transfer a bit of material between the two. Do a harder stop. Done a couple of hard stops. Do a couple of sort of more gentle long stops. We should be pretty good at that point. As long as we don't feel anything unusual, we don't hear anything unusual. But so far everything's nice and smooth, nice and quiet. Then I'd say we are good.